Well, hello, it's Richard Pears from FinextraTV. And today, delighted to be joined by Mads Steinmüller. He's the head of climate and nature at Danske Bank Asset Management. Welcome, good to see you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for having me.
Well, look, really excited to talk to you today about the paper that you've released. As everyone knows, at Finextra, we're focusing on the impact of climate change and nature loss, plans to mitigate and adapt for that, and the role of finance and technology. And so maybe, Mads, unbelievably, people don't know who you are and who Danske are. Tell us, first of all, who you are and what the organization is focused on.
Yeah, so I'm heading up our new established department called Climate and Nature, and we just established it back in November, so it's still quite new, of course. But our main role is to support the investment organization with research and data within climate and nature, and further support the commitments that the bank have made within both climate and nature, where we have been committed to become net zero by 2050, where we also have interim targets. And we actually also recently made commitments within biodiversity, where we'll engage with 30 companies that are linked to deforestation and issues within oceans and so on. And to the viewers that don't know Danske Bank Asset Management, we are a Nordic asset manager. We are one of the largest asset managers in the Nordics and the largest asset manager here in Denmark. And of course, we invest in all different asset classes and have clients all around the world, actually. And I think we have an AUM within 700 billion. Oh, sorry, 100 billion euros. That was a bit too much, but 100 billion euros, yeah. So, and one of our core, you can say, our core opportunity, or what we do good, is within responsible investments. Of course, we have a team of 20 specialists within our responsible investment team that supports the investment organization, making sure that we integrate data and into our analysis, but also that we engage with the companies that we invest into.
Fantastic. Great introduction. Now, I saw this paper that you've released, Navigating Biodiversity, a review of 100 Nordic companies. So you're assessing their impacts and dependencies, and you're looking at companies, I think, with an aggregate market cap of about 1.4 trillion euros. Tell me, why you did this and what your findings were.
Yeah, so first of all, we all know, we have all seen the reports coming out from World Economic Forum, of course, that almost half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature. At the same time, we're also seeing the deterioration of nature. WWF are out with numerous reports saying that, well, the state of nature is really bad and we need to do something. Also, I think, because that's sometimes something that we're forgetting, is that in the past 1 or 2 years, we've actually had a tremendous years for nature because we have had the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, the Global Biodiversity Framework, which came out with specific targets on how countries and companies can deal with this issue. Also in 2023, we saw that both Science-Based Target and the TNFD came out with new frameworks and guidance to companies on how to deal with these issues. At the same time, also Business for Nature came out with really concrete actions on how you can actually become nature positive before 2030 and so on. So we wanted to understand, okay, we are a Nordic investor. We invest into many of these Nordic companies. What is the state of how they're approaching nature? Because they have not had the guidance in the past on how to deal with this issue. So we wanted to look into, okay, so what is the state of the nature, you can say, and what is the state of how companies are dealing with this issue? So what we did was we looked into 100 sustainability reports, websites, policies, and so on, to see how are they dealing with these different issues that there are within biodiversity, because it is a very complex issue. It's not only about deforestation or water, but it's also about how you're handling your impacts and dependencies and how you're setting targets and so on. And what we found out was that, of course, a lot of these companies are acknowledging that they have an issue within biodiversity, that they have impacts, that they have dependencies. But the issue that they haven't looked into is, what are their impacts and dependencies? That's what we would, as investors, like to know. Also, given that we are expected from clients and society to steer capital towards the companies that are impacting that have a positive impact on nature and which are they're mitigating the dependencies. And you know what? That's an issue for us right now because we don't have the data, we don't have the insights from the companies. So that's what we're trying to do with this white paper, is to tell both the companies and clients that we want to get started, but there are issues out there, and we also want to push the companies in getting started on this journey. And there are companies out there within the Nordics also that have started this journey. But we want to see even more companies getting started and setting targets, measuring the impacts and dependencies, because in the end, it will have consequences in the bottom line. It will impact the revenues, and in the end, our returns, of course. And we need to remember what is our most important task from our clients. That is to deliver returns. And in the end, this might be difficult if we're not able to assess the nature risk that these companies might have.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you put a lot in there, and as people probably know, the central banks are asking people to report on climate risk, nature risk. There's various regulations passing through into local law which are illustrating this. But I love the key point you've made, which is that these forms of risk are actually risks on the bottom line, and your return to shareholders and stakeholders, as well as obviously the social license. So you packed a lot in there. I noticed that you said, people are obviously getting to grips with this, and it's early days. I think one of the stats, correct me if I'm wrong, was about 73% of your the people you surveyed were having issues with the complexity of biodiversity, but that some were doing it kind of well, or getting further ahead of the pack. Is there any insights from those early adopters that you could share about what they're doing better than others?
Yeah, so I definitely think there are these companies within the Nordics that are leading the pack, you can say, within the Nordics, and those are companies that are already running pilot projects together with science-based targets, setting targets on the impacts that they have. They're actually also starting to make nature restoration projects, so restoring the nature that they've had impacting for many years. Also because they're seeing that this is a social license to operate, but also they also see now that this might actually have an impact on their business in the end if they are not able to restore that lake where they're consuming the water from, or if they're not able to restore the soil where they're getting the corn from when they are producing beers or alcohol or whatever it might be, sodas for that matter. So we're seeing that companies are setting relevant targets, credible targets to mitigate the impacts on nature, but also their dependencies. And at the same time, they're doing it because it's critical to the business, and they want to be in the forefront. And we, of course, as investor, we believe that the companies that are transitioning both within climate but also nature, they will also be the future winners because they will be ahead of the others in terms of this issue, I think. So and also what I also want to credit some of the companies is that they have actually but this is only a few, of course, but some of them have actually made reports around what is my impacts and dependencies. They understand their business risk. And that is not only within the direct operations that they have within the Nordics, but this is on a global scale. So, for instance, many of them do have biodiversity risk through their value chains, and they've actually assessed what is the commodities that are linked to deforestation, for instance, or what are the commodities that are linked to water issues in different regions, because biodiversity is very local. It's not like climate where you have CO2 emissions, but you have local issues around the world, and these are the ones that you need to map to understand your business risk. And to get those insights, then you can start setting targets and so on. And this is what I think is some of the companies are doing really great. And I think in 2024 we will see even more companies enhanced within this area. I think at least that is what the talks that we have had with many of these companies that is what they're telling us, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I often sort of say, and it's kind of a soundbite really, but it's climate is global and nature is local. I mean, obviously both are true, but that locality is a key part of TNFD, isn't it? Which is something that you spoke about there, as well as SPTN. Have you found, and I noticed in your report, it seemed that most of the governance mechanisms and the key pillars of TNFD you've adopted. Tell us a bit more about how that's been useful for you and how you're seeing TNFD framework translating into your work.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think it's so important that we get a framework and a standardization such as TNFD. It's so important that companies have this within the same sectors, have a framework to assess, but also report on this important matter, but also for us as investors to have something to lean on. And we have actually implemented the TNFD framework into our engagement framework. So we have aligned our questions and our expectations to companies with the TNFD. Also, so they get the same questions from different stakeholders, right? And which I think is really important. And the TNFD framework, it's made by researchers, it's made by people who are specialized within this area, and that's why it's so important also that we can rely on this topic as well. And if you check our white paper, you can also see that that we are at ground zero in terms of in terms of the Nordic companies being aligned with TNFD, which is of course natural. The TNFD came in, I think it was in September last year, so they haven't had time to implement it yet. But it gives us a state of where are the companies right now, and they have a lot of work ahead of them. We see, of course, that many have implemented good governance into the processes. They have learned a lot from implementing the climate agenda into their to the boards, the remuneration, and how they deal with this whole issue. But where we see they're lacking in terms of the alignment with TNFD is, of course, within the strategy. How will we actually deal with this issue? It's about setting targets and metrics and measuring it, of course.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful, but it's good to know, isn't it, that there is this data which you can look at. Obviously, TNFD have got a lot of case studies there, and a lot of guidance how to get up and running. Now, you spoke in your notes as well about active stewardship. So when you're having to get this data, obviously for your regulatory purposes, as you described, as well as obviously your returns for your investors, you're asking for it. How do you actually then go through the process of stewardship to both help your corporates as well as obviously enable your own business?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we have a data issue, of course, which you also mentioned yourself. So what we wanted to get started on asking companies for more data and for more actions on biodiversity. So what we did was that we developed a framework where we have 19 asks or expectations to companies. We have divided them into different levels, also a way for us to measure where are the companies in this journey on addressing biodiversity issues. And what is mostly important for us is that companies acknowledge that they have an issue, that they make policies in terms of mitigating these issues. But then again, we also want them to set targets measuring that, and that's what we ask companies to do. And I also want to state that it's not important for us right now that the companies set targets on all the issues that they have. It's important for us that they get started because this is a complex issue. So you need to start somewhere. So maybe start by setting a target within one area and then grow from there. That's at least also the advice that we've received from many of the NGOs that we engage with, is that start somewhere because this is a complex issue, and then you develop your competencies from that, whether it's on water, whether it's on deforestation, or whatever it might be. And that's also our message to companies: get started, and then let's grow from there, because we want to support the companies in the transition. We don't want to exclude companies, so we want to support them in the transition and support them towards being nature positive. And of course, we tell them about our research and tell them about what we have identified as issues within that company, and we utilize different data from a data provider called Anchor, which is an open source which everybody can use. We've looked into the WWS risk filter tool, and so on, and lean up also against on the guidance that come from Business for Nature. They have made excellent guidance on how different sectors can move within this. So it's also, we also contribute to companies research and tell them where do we see the issues from an investor point of view, and they actually do listen. They acknowledge that they have issues, but they also acknowledge that it takes time, of course. And they're also still implementing other issues like climate, and now also CSRD being a huge issue or being a huge task, I must say, in the EU at least. So the sustainability departments around the different companies are very busy at the moment. I must say that.
Yeah, for sure, and I think it's really important that you highlight that those points of you want to help people, you don't want to exclude people, and we're going on a journey to perfection, but we don't need to start with perfection, that people worry, don't they, about litigation, green hushing, all of these different things,
yeah.
And knowing the trust environment that you're working in with your asset manager partners, bringing the data that you've said is, I think, really, really important to open this up. So I'm really excited to hear about that. Tell us, about what you see more broadly now, in the market going forward over 2024, perhaps, as a result of this first set of research. What comes next for you and for Danske?
Yeah. So I think in general, I think we'll see more companies moving within biodiversity. Also, given that now, for instance, we just joined the Nature Action 100, which is a collaborative engagement initiative where we, together with other investors, have identified 100 companies that we will try to support and push in a you can say greener direction within biodiversity. So I think, and now also UNPRI also just created their framework on biodiversity. So I think we'll see even more companies moving within this area, which I think is really positive. And I also think nature 2024 will be a nature year. We have the upcoming COP16, of course. So I think a lot of companies, a lot of investors will focus on this area. I'm also expecting to see more nature-related proposals on the upcoming voting season. But for Danske, I think our next step is, of course, to get even more data on how to assess these companies. Right now, all the data providers are coming out with new data on where do companies have their you can say impacts and dependencies within the different locations, asset locations. And we're also seeing whether we could link revenues to the dependencies, because that's something that you could use in your investment processes. And of course, I think we will also see within the asset manager space that we will see new products coming out that are related to biodiversity, because we are getting better data and we can link biodiversity to the SDGs, for instance, and so on. So I think we'll see more biodiversity related products. And then it's up to, let's see whether we can that would enable the transition. That's up for questions still yet to see, and hopefully it's a big wish for me that we will see more investable nature-based solutions. Right now, I think many of the investor-based solutions are within private markets, but we need to have more scale within that to being able to force at least to also to invest into those. But I think we will see more development within that area as well. And also we're seeing an increase of blue bonds, for instance, and sovereign bonds that are linked to biodiversity. I think that will be a trend we will see. Maybe not so much within 24, but at least in the near future, I think we will see more of that coming out. Definitely.
Yeah, and just one final thing, as you said all of that, this obviously always there's this, this chain of data and the provenance of it, which is sometimes a challenge. And obviously, I was thinking as you were talking about the bonds, this debt for nature, Gabon stories and things like this. A lot of this has been difficult to syndicate the market because of this transparency. Do you have any sort of almost requests? I suppose we have this nature climate tech audience, hopefully listening in, and those satellites, sensors, blockchain, there's a lot of people mobilizing. Do you see any kind of themes there that you would like to see mobilized to help you in delivering what you're doing with that idea of provenance, so that capital can move more quickly?
Yeah, I think transparency, of course, is very important. And when we engage with our data providers and when we engage with companies, what we hear is that many of these companies are actually investing heavily into agri-tech, for instance, or biodiversity tech, whether it's satellites or whether it's agriculture technology within agriculture that are making soil better or whatever it might be. So I think that's a huge opportunity also for many companies, but of course also all the companies that are enabling that transition. So that is definitely also something that we are looking into from an investor perspective, because it's really interesting business, and it's a whole nother business that could that will of course enable the transition. Definitely.
Brilliant, Mads. Well, listen, it's been fascinating. I could talk to you all day, but
we could talk for hours.
Yeah, exactly. But keep us updated, and thanks very much. We'll speak to you soon.
Likewise, Richard.